Hey guys, what's up? You may or may not hear grunting in the background during this video because I have two tiny humans who are right next to me. So the purpose of today's video is to talk about our NICU journey. September is NICU Awareness Month, and I never would have known that, never knew that before now, but obviously our most recent experience having twins who were in the NICU for 6 weeks has taught us a lot about the neonatal intensive care unit, also known as the NICU. Let's just start with what happened. My water broke when I was just 27 weeks pregnant with Mo-Di twins, or identical twins, and I had to be hospitalized due to the premature rupture of membranes, or basically my water breaking early, but I was not in labor. So I was in the hospital for 3 weeks, just waiting it out, hoping that I wouldn't go into labor. Trust me, it didn't look anything like what I thought it would look like. I was emergency C-section, saw the babies for 2 seconds. They were wheeled straight up to NICU, and that by far was the hardest, one of the hardest emotionally parts is just having the babies, them being tiny 3-pound babies. They're holding them like this, and then they rush them upstairs, and you know, you're on the bed, on a table in the OR trying to heal and all that stuff, and they're, you know, up there, you don't know what's going on. So the boys were rushed off to NICU when they were born on July 3rd at 30 weeks and 2 days. And I was wheeled back to my room to recover. Greg went up there with them, checked on them, and then came back with me. And then when my anesthesia wore off, and when my epidural wore off and I wasn't numb anymore, I was able to get wheeled up to see them. It was pretty scary. You know, your tiny babies are in an incubator and they're on so many tubes and things. So by the grace of God, our boys were born breathing on their own. They did not have to be intubated, which means they didn't have to have a tube down their throat. They just had to have a CPAP oxygen mask on to help them continue to breathe. So our babies had CPAPs on at first, just covering their little nose and mouth, and they were able to get off the CPAPs in like 24 hours, which is amazing for 30-week twins that only weighed 3 pounds. A blessing that they were only on CPAP, and then CPAP was just for a few days, 24 hours, and then they were on nasal cannulas, which is the thing that goes up your nose, which is oxygen. That's it. Truly a miracle. I mean, it's a miracle. The experience in and of itself was a roller coaster. A lot of people in these preemie mom groups on Facebook, they will tell you it's 1 step forward, 2 steps back. I rebuked that. I rebuked that in the name of Jesus for my babies. I prayed over them. We're not doing that. I wrote prayers. I wrote these prayers out and I taped them to their incubators. And I prayed those prayers over those babies every day, all day, that they would not take 2 steps forward and a step back, or 1 step forward and 2 steps back. I prayed that because mentally I had gone through a lot, and it's not about me, but it's simply, I wanted my boys to just progress. Every day it was, Lord, may they progress. We rebuke regression, because the preemie NICU life, a lot of regression happens. They take off, they sprint, and they do so good at birth, and they're not on oxygen, and they're not on this and not on that, and then out of nowhere, next thing you know, they need oxygen masks, they need this and that, and you see it with the babies around you. You see them do well one day, and the next day you're wondering, hey, why is that baby on oxygen today? It wasn't on oxygen yesterday. Why is that baby on, why does he have that on and didn't have that on? And you just kind of notice, because I'm super observant, and I'll ask the nurses, like, what's going on? And she'll say, oh, well, he had a spell last night. He had a this last night. And it's just like, oh my gosh, it's just up and down and up and down, which is why it's the ICU, which is why it's considered critical care, because you just never know what's going to happen and how these babies are going to act and react, right? It was hard to see the parents who had been there for 90 days and 100 days. And one woman, her baby was beside ours, and the baby looked like pretty big, like not like a new baby. And I was kind of curious, and come to find out the baby was almost 1 and had been in NICU from birth. people really do have to stay there way longer than they ever anticipated. And it's truly emotionally draining, because your piece of your heart is at a hospital and you're having to go there every day. And for us, because of those of you who know, I had the babies in Nashville, but we live in Louisville. We were staying at my mom's house, and we were driving to Nashville 35, 40 minutes sometimes to get to the hospital each way, each day, to see our babies, which is hard. We had one little baby beside us. His parents lived an hour and a half away, and they couldn't even come every day. And then there were other people who, they couldn't come every day because they had other kids at home. So it's just, it's extremely emotionally exhausting to have babies or baby in the NICU that you're having to visit. And you always call, and there's just this like heavy on your chest when you call to check on them, and you're praying that the nurse doesn't say something happened when you were gone. For me, I legitimately feel like I had a form of PTSD, because I got this Apple Watch when I was in the hospital, or when I had the babies. It was my birthday, and it was my birthday present. And so I'd just gotten it, and I wasn't used to having one that, you know, anything that rang on my hand when I wasn't away or whatever, when I wasn't by my phone, I should say. And I saved Centennial Hospital NICU in my phone in case they called. I would immediately know who it was and answer. So when I was at my mom's house relaxing or whatever, and my phone would ring, obviously my watch would ring, and it would say Centennial NICU. And for some reason, that's who would always call. I feel like that's what I would always see on this watch. So sometimes when I look at this watch, all I think is Centennial NICU, and it like brings back like bad memories. But I know specifically they would call sometimes when we were there and say, you know, the babies, they need a blood transfusion, or they need this, they need that. And anytime I would see it pop up on my watch, my heart would sink. It would just like, my body felt like it would drain, because I was so scared of what they were gonna say. So that was really hard for me, is getting calls from the hospital, because you just never know, especially because they're constantly telling you things can change in an instant. Just like with our release date, we were looking at, even though they don't tell you in advance when you're going to be released, they will give you like a 24-hour notice. So they told us to bring in the car seats, which is a good sign in the NICU. If you bring in your car seat, that means they're ready to do a car seat test, which means that they're ready for the babies to go home. A car seat test is when they put the baby in the car seat with the heart rate monitor on and the oxygen monitor, to make sure that if they're in a car seat, they won't stop breathing. So they told us to bring the car seats in to do car seat test. I was like, oh my God, we're about to go home. Both passed their car seat test. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. They're going home tomorrow. I'm so excited. And we left the hospital. The NICU calls and says, we don't know what happened, but Grayson just had an episode. An episode, or a spell, depending on what the hospital calls it, is when the baby's heart rate and oxygen both drop down. And they can't get it up on their own. The doctor has to physically, the nurse has to physically like stimulate them or do something to make them breathe again. And they had each only had maybe one of those the whole NICU stay. And then at the very end of that 6 weeks, when we were getting ready to go home, the day before we would have gone home, they called and said, Mama, Grayson just had this crazy spell. His heart rate and oxygen dropped, and he wouldn't bring it up on his own, and we had to physically stimulate him and give him an oxygen mask and make him breathe again. I mean, that's the kind of stuff you deal with. Like, you don't know what each day is going to bring. And then hearing something like that the day before you're set to bring your child home is even scarier, because you're wondering, like, you mean to tell me that I could have brought him home tomorrow? That could have happened at home? And he wasn't hooked up to monitors. He could have been in his crib, and that could have happened. And like, what if I didn't see it? Or what if, you know, I didn't have, you know, I don't have an oxygen mask at home. What if I wasn't able to get him to breathe again? Like, what, you know, those things go through your mind. It can be very, very scary. Another thing was, I didn't get to hold them for days after they were born, because they had lines going into their belly button. They had a cannula in. They had to be under the lights, the bilirubin lights for their jaundice. They just had to be in like a closed environment very contained and almost like the womb, because they needed to continue to develop. So for several days, I didn't get to hold them, which was so hard. And I think I finally held them skin to skin after they were like 4 or 5 days old, which I don't wish that on anybody. It's a horrible feeling not to be able to hold your babies for days. The experience, it taught me to never take anything for granted, especially the health of your children and your babies. My mamas who go full term, kudos to you, because you do not want that premature baby life. It's hard, it's tough, but again, you know, having babies is a beautiful thing, whether they're preemies or full term, whether they were in NICU or not. It's beautiful, you know, either way, but it's rough. It's rough. And I know some full-term moms their babies have to go to NICU as well. So it's not just a preemie thing. I get that. But it is definitely, it's a lot to take in, but more than anything, it did increase my faith to a height I just never expected with my daughter. All right, I'm back. Sorry, we had a little storage full issue. Another great thing about the NICU is that we were able to ask for primary nurses, which means that they had the same nurse pretty much most days. Whatever days those nurses were working, they were assigned to our boys. We had a daytime and a nighttime primary who really looked after our boys and took care of them like they were their own, and really just knew them well, so they knew what was normal for them and what wasn't, which was a huge blessing as well. And then the last thing I was just gonna say is, for those who have never experienced anything like this, like me, or don't have any other friends or family who had gone through this, which I didn't really have any who had gone through this that were close to me, this is how you can help. If you know someone who has a child in the NICU, see what you can do for them at home. Ask if maybe you can take care of their animals, or mow their lawn, or get their mail and their packages. We had people doing all those things for us, which was such a blessing. So thank you to all those who stepped into those things. Ask if you can cook them a home-cooked meal, especially if they're at the hospital a lot. They're probably eating out. We ate out a lot. So give them gift cards for food, money for food. We were at the hospital so long each day that we had to eat out every day, because if not, I mean, you can't, because of COVID, you can't eat in the hospital, so, because you have to remove your mask. So we couldn't bring food into the hospital because that required us to take our mask off and eat, which you can't do. So we couldn't bring food in. We had to eat before or after we left, and that always required a lot of money eating out in downtown Nashville, even if it was fast food, you know? So give them money, give them gift cards, gas cards, if you know they're having to drive a long way to get to the NICU. That's a huge blessing as well, because it's a big expense. And then just support, prayer. I appreciate prayer more than anything, because I believe the prayers of the righteous are not forsaken, and God heard them all. He heard every single prayer. And our boys they're doing really, really great today on their due date. And they're 10 weeks old. I mean, 2 months old, I should say. And just, it is beyond that they're here, they're home, they're healthy, weeks before their due date. Huge blessing. And I just want to encourage anybody who, again, knows someone who's going through this or has to go through this themselves, to stay encouraged, regardless of the different things that can happen in NICU, because a lot of things can happen there to the babies, infections and, you know, bad days and things like that. But stay encouraged and reach out to people to keep you encouraged and lifted up, because we had a village praying for us and taking care of our daughter when we were at the hospital with our boys. So that's it for NICU Awareness Month. Bye.